Well, it looks like, oh, we're not talking game design, are we? Hold on. There we are. Goofing off in Unreal. Been a while. I couldn't be bothered for the past 2 weeks. I was doing other stuff. It happens. So, streaming now, though. Streaming some Unreal stuff, just playing around with shaders, I guess. So I don't really have a lot of things that, I mean, I don't really have a strong idea of what I want to do. I'm pretty burned out on developing 3D games. And I spent the last couple of weeks doing other stuff instead. But there are some things I want to explore with the shaders. There's some new features that I really want to see. And there's also some existing features that I never bothered to look at. So we're going to try some stuff. Nothing terribly advanced. If you're, I just drooled water from this cup that I tried to take a sip up. Great. Nothing terribly advanced. If you've ever seen any shader stuff, then you're not going to be terribly surprised. I'm just doing some basics and getting used to using Unreal again. God damn it. This is one of those things that never changes. I don't know why this never saves, but it never does. I think at one point I even found a button that said save as permanent for all sites, for all projects ever, and it just didn't take. I don't know what's wrong. But there, now we can pan it correctly. I don't know why the default is just wrong. I have no idea. Is that a VR thing? Is it backwards in VR maybe? Because in every other editing suite I've ever used, ever, for the past 40 years, it's this way. Not this way. I'm sure you can tell exactly what I'm talking about. Anyhow, let's go ahead and put a light in. Just a standard old directional light will do. Now, this project isn't using the new lighting engine. I should probably turn that on, though, right? I mean, it's not important for this particular project. I don't believe the lighting engine comes with any new shader stuff. I think the lighting engine is specifically for shadows, and we're not doing any shadow stuff today. So I guess there's not really any big reason to turn it on. We'll just use this as is. I'm reusing an old project because I didn't feel like making a new one. So we're going to go ahead and create a new shader for this block. Here we are. Material. And we're going to call this shader test. Everybody likes to name their stuff shader test. We're going to pick at our fingers because I think I got a splinter on a weekend. There it is. All right, so we're going to just pop that on. Oh, look, it's beautiful. Let's go ahead and edit it. Oh, no, I didn't get it. I'm sorry. I should have pulled out this splinter before I started. I just didn't realize I had one since I wasn't doing computer stuff today very much. Oh, come on. Seriously? It's annoying to have a splinter on your finger when you're trying to do computer stuff. It kind of pokes at the mouse. All right, I think I got it this time. The hazards of solar power. Okay, so if we open this up, we should be able to just pop it open like this. And what we're going to want to do is try some junk. I also forgot to check and see, is my audio okay? Yeah, it's fine. All right, so we're going to try some junk. And one of the things I really want to try is using a texture to do tessellation, but I'm not 100% sure that I know quite how to do that. We're going to have to do some experimenting. So first we're going to go ahead and give it a default color, which is not going to be black because I can't see it if it's black. And then we're going to just have to figure out which of these things allows us to tessellate. Now I know there is a tessellation multiplier right here. And I think that the way that you access that is you change the shader type to one that supports tessellation. But I sort of remember that maybe I read that tessellation was a different thing in the default shader, like you just access it a different way. That doesn't seem right. Base layer tessellation, that doesn't seem... No, that's not it at all. So if we take a look at the defaults here, the basic idea is I want to add tessellation on the fly. I don't want to have just a generic tessellate this much value. Well, there's no tessellation value in the parameters, in the details. So maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I do have to change it from a specific different sort of thing. Surface is correct. Subsurface, default lit, pre-integrated skin. These don't seem like they would be tessellated in any different way. How do we turn on tessellation? Let's just take a quick look at the internets. Hello, internets. Oh. Unreal shader tessellation. It autofilled Unreal shader. Why so many? So if we take a look at the tessellation, DX11. Okay, so my guess is that the settings for this project are not DX11. But it doesn't really tell you how to get it. It just tells you that it exists. It's also for 4.9 rather than 5. So if we were to take a look at the project settings, we're going to just check and see whether or not there's one that needs to be edited. I should really do basic personal maintenance, like wiping out my face and wiping down my face and pulling slivers out of my fingers before I start streaming. But I was already running an hour late, so I figured, oh, whatever. We'll do it on camera. Everybody likes to listen to a guy rub his face. So if we take a look at the project settings, there they are. We're just going to sort of cruise down and see what we can find just for kicks. Animation, audio, collision, console, cooker, crowd manager. Well, that sounds neat. We'll have to use that someday, but not today. Garbage, general settings, tiny fonts. These seem all fine. I'm just seeing if there's anything. This is something where I'm not really used to Unreal. I'm not hunting for anything specific at the moment. I'm kind of cruising around looking at the options. If there's tessellation stuff at some point, we'll figure it out. So this is the this is specific to levels, not to meshes. It's not the nanite thing. It's an older thing. I am okay with that. Landscape, navigation, network, physics, rendering is probably here. Dithered LOD transition. Woohoo! I know I've looked at all of these before. We're just kind of looking at them again. Occlusion culling. So I don't see any signs that we're not using DX11, but I also don't see any signs that DX11 is specific. We might as well turn this on before we move on. We'll have to reboot the visual here. It's not a big deal. This particular project has already recompiled all of its shaders, and if you were here 2 weeks ago, you might know that's why I stopped streaming, because it took literally 2 hours to recompile all of the shaders in the project I was in. And then as soon as it was done, it started to recompile them again. It was just miserable. And that was because I was upgrading from 4.9 to 5, and apparently the shader compilation is different, so it recompiled every shader on the planet. Anything that was even vaguely related to the project or any library that could theoretically be included in any project was copied to a new directory and recompiled twice. Brilliant. But that didn't happen today. Is tessellation something that only works with forward rendering? I have a feeling that might be the case. That would be terrible. Yeah, okay. I think that what we've got here is it just needs to be it's not going to work like I thought it was. Give me a second to switch you over to Phoenix Wright, because I got to reboot this Unreal project so that I can get it. I don't want to test. There we are, and we'll just pop it back open. But unfortunately, in order to do that, I've got to pop open Epic, because for some reason the shortcut doesn't launch the selected version of Unreal. It launches a version of Unreal, and it's never the right one. I can't like right click on the giant yellow button and say make this a shortcut. That would be too useful. They want you to open up their store every single time you ever want to do anything. Now, what did I call this? Was it test? It's just test, yeah. Grind. Oh, well, thank you for opening this other level, which nobody wants to see. Hey, look, there's new plugins. That's one of those things. I think that the new plugins are saved. The plugin updates must be saved in the same spot. The notifications must be saved in the same spot that that the settings, the default settings, are saved, because it says that every single time I open a project as well. So my thinking is that I've got some kind of permissions error in the Unreal install. Like maybe it needs to have like admin permissions to write to a specific settings file somewhere, and it's just not asking me for them. I don't really know how to solve it though. And you can see that the tessellation didn't turn on. I have a feeling that tessellation is hello Forntis. I'm just trying to figure out if I can get tessellation to work without having to jump through any hoops, and the answer is no. So now I'm looking for hoops to see whether or not I can get it to work. Okay, so nobody is telling me just what's wrong. I have a feeling there was some audio on that page. That wasn't something I wanted here. Nobody's telling me why this isn't working. They all just kind of say that it works. Enable it in the details panel under the section named tessellation. This section named tessellation? That's not how you spell it at all. So this section that I've searched for, named tessellation, is definitely here and is not completely wrong. But I guess we can manually search and see whether there is a tessellation section hidden in here somewhere. Let me switch back to Chrome so I can see if people talk. There's no tessellation. Now, I'm under the impression that what's actually going on here is that we're rendering things along a different pipeline. It's incompatible. In Unity, I know that's the case. You can only tessellate in, I think it's forward mode, and we're using deferred mode, and I think that's what's happening here too. I think it's only available in deferred mode or in forward mode, and they're just not telling us. They're just refusing to say, oh, this is only available in a different mode. And so they tell you what it is, and then it doesn't actually do anything. I don't know what it's called anymore. Property 1. I just need a 1. 1 there. And you can see how that's all grayed out. So clearly that's not actually doing anything. And I don't know how to ungray it. There doesn't seem to be any option to do so. Maybe it's an Unreal 5 thing. Unreal 5 tessellation. Is tessellation depreciated? From the latest changelogs, tessellation is now depreciated. So they're saying that nobody's going to be. They're saying that, okay. So they're saying it got depreciated because everybody's supposed to use nanite. I don't know enough about nanite to be able to control how it's going to tessellate shit, and I didn't expect to have to look into it. People are saying that there's better ways to do tessellation, but none of them are actually available at the moment. Great. But this is old. This is like from more than a year ago, year and a half ago. And that's strange that they would do this. People are arguing about whether or not nanite is going to be worthwhile. That's completely worthless to me. I don't want to know about nanite, especially not from people a year and a half ago who'd never used it. Yeah, so this is all ancient news. Let's go ahead and see whether or not I can find something from the past, like, year. All of this is Unreal 4. Here's another person arguing about the same thing, but this is from a week ago, so let's see whether they've got any different responses. Ian says, thanks for taking the time to write us. Oh, great. This is about Bridge. Okay, so this is for Quixel. I don't need Quixel's tessellation. And any corporation that responds to a technical question with, thank you for taking the time to write us, is like, just answer the fucking question. I didn't take the time to write you. You sucked, and I had to come by because of that. You know, that's the whole point. You know. Oh, look, it's another video. There's apparently lots of videos about this. But there's no... I thought this was going to be easy, and it turns out it's basically impossible. Nope, I don't see any sign that tessellation... Nobody's talking about it. They're all saying, I've replaced tessellation with this, or I did, you know, something besides that. There are some videos about it, and presumably the videos will tell me some stuff, but I don't want to watch videos on stream. So this guy's talking about PBR materials. So there might be some kind of specific material that they work for, but I don't know what it would be. This should be pretty basic. Let's try a couple more things, and then we'll move on to something else. So right now, none of these would be significantly better. I mean, we could go with something that wasn't opaque, but that shouldn't change either. What's a subsurface shading model anyway? So I think the subsurface shading model is specifically for like skin, but it certainly didn't enable tessellation. Oh, well, here's actual skin, which is just the same thing, but with some defaults, I assume. Two-sided foliage, hair. Everybody loves hair. Actually, I do want to play around with the hair shader. We might do that next. Cloth. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't realize there was like a specific cloth shader. That's cool. Let's see. The difference is it's got fuzz color. Oh, that's fascinating. I wonder how good that is. Eyeballs. That's obviously not going to be it. Single layer water. No, none of these are any better. Even the unlit one isn't allowing for any tessellation. This is interesting. I assume that it's one of these things. Unreal does this from time to time. They will leave something on the menu and it will be worthless, and you won't know what it's supposed to be or how it's supposed to work or any of that stuff, and it's just discontinued and they never removed it. This is the biggest problem with Unreal for me. It's all this stuff where you're doing stuff and then you'll like right click and then you'll say, oh, look at all these options you've got. Sure. But 90% of them are worthless because they're from hardware that you're not using and can't use. And you didn't want to include it in the first place, or, they're like a function for every possible class that's ever existed in any Unreal project on the planet. Each one of them has their own version of the function, and they're all listed out in, just aggressive order. And that's, alphabetical order. That's like not how I like things. And they leave so much crap in without bothering to describe what's depreciated, where. Like, if tessellation is depreciated, then it should say tessellation is depreciated, not controls the amount of tessellation along the surface. Even if tessellation isn't depreciated, it should say what I have to do to turn it on, because it's disabled at the moment. So since it's disabled, it should say, oh, well, this is disabled until you turn on forward rendering. Which, I guess we'll just check that out. All right, we'll have to click on it. All right, so if we take a look in here, we should be able to switch it out for forward somewhere in here. Let me just take a look here. Although I don't imagine it's going to work with Lumen. It might be disabled. There. Oh, I don't really want to if it's going to require a restart. All right, well, it looks like that's something I'm going to have to watch a tutorial for. I was expecting it to be really easy. I was going to do some cool tests and see whether or not I could get the tessellation to work along unusual fracture lines, and I can't. I'm thinking about topology in my head, and that's sort of one of the big hang-ups. When you do decals and stuff, they look great, but decals aren't... let's go ahead and create a decal shader, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Just copy-paste, move it up, and then we will change this out for a decal material. Decal. It's a shouty decal. Oh, I forgot to actually put it on the cube. Decal. There we are. And to make a decal, we just go down here and change it from surface to decal. And then if we want a texture, we have to plug it in. Is it T for texture? No, there it is. I got 8 of them. Brilliant. And I don't actually know. I guess we want RGBA. Nope, just RGB. Hello? There we are. And the alpha comes down here. Error. Missing input texture. Well, that's fine. Give me an input texture. And we can obviously make this into a parameter. Boom. We'll call this texture. That's textire, not texture. Well, come on. Texture. There we go. And we'll just switch this out for something else there. And that doesn't seem to be the right thing. Let's try one that doesn't have just a giant... oh, that wasn't what I wanted either. Yeah, that one. And that should be a texture. I'm not sure why this hasn't updated. I guess I have to hit apply maybe. it will have compilation errors. Material using the deferred decal domain needs to use the blend model translucent. All right, so let's go ahead and tell it to use the blend. That's just me not noticing. You'd think that they would just enable that automatically. All right, so if we then apply that, and then we can just take a look, and you can see that what we've got now is some decals that are being applied by this box we've created, and that's not quite right, is it? They're not being projected onto the box. They're floating on the box. They are not actually decals. So let's go ahead and create a box. Shapes. Cube. There we go, just so we can see what's in the background there. And what we have now is just a transparent material. I think that I have to create a decal. Yeah, that's not it. Creating a decal is easy if you know how to do it. I've done it before. I just can't remember how you do it. There it is. So it is called decal. It just didn't want to show up when I typed decal. So there's our decal, and you can see that by default it is garbage, and that's because there's no material in it. So we're just going to drop that material in it. Wow, engine resources, huh? That's not what I need. Decal. There we go. So now we've got this this decal material, and it's not quite right, is it? It's definitely broadcasting it, but it looks like there's something going on where it's not doing it the way I thought it would. Is this because decal size is all screwed up? No, that was like the box. We don't need to modify that. Okay, so that was the size of the projector, not the size of the decal itself. Okay, so you can see from the side, you can actually see it. See that? So maybe it's just that we've got the wrong side pointed down. Yeah, that was it. So there we are. I was just, come on. Oh, it's not. That arrow is, okay, I see what's going on here. I thought that arrow was the move arrow from the widget, but it's actually the decal direction arrow, and that's what was getting me confused. All right, so there, you can see what the decal does. It's pretty easy to create a decal, and you can even give them like bump maps. Let's go ahead and do that. Obviously, I mean normal maps. So if we just move this up and then cut and paste, move it down. So what we're going to want to do is have a, first off, this needs to be named something else. We'll name this height map. And we need to convert the height map into a normal from height map. There it is. So this is a way to create a normal map without having to actually create one. And it's just a cheap in terms of programming. It's actually quite expensive. Is this just a normal? Is that what that is? I think it is. So these values should have some defaults, but it doesn't look like they do. So we're just going to start to plug these in. We'll call this 1, and we'll just boop. Height map UV offset. Oh, there is a default value. Okay, we're going to go ahead and leave those default values as defaults. I'm not really sure whether or not these coordinates will work if I just leave them empty. We'll find out now-ish. Let's take a look. Yeah, it worked. So we've converted the decal into a height map, and you can see that it's got some depth to it. Now, obviously, it's super pixely because this is a very low quality height map. It's not low quality texture, rather. It's not got any sort of complex high. It's just too small. It's really tiny. So we have these really, really grainy results. But you can see that it does have a height map. So it appears, if you put aside the grainy result, it appears to have a, an existence on the surface. The problem is that it doesn't. So when you use these decals, and you can also use embedded secondary material layers. You don't have to use a decal. You can just have a material that has layers on it. But either way, when you do that, you're not getting actual depth. It sort of looks like you are, but the closer you go to the side here, the more obvious that it's not truly there. And that means that there's a lot of things you can't do with this. And I was trying to see whether I could do some tessellation to fake it. It doesn't look like that's going to work. So when you're talking about topology, if you wanted this cube over here to actually have a rim where it's being cut, then you would have to actually carve it up. And there are some problems with that. For example, this. Now you have to carve it up again. So when you're trying to do something like ship hull extrusions and stuff, it's a challenge to do it, because you have to actually have these meshes, and you've got to have some kind of setup where you have a way to have some overlays. And this is trivial, right? It's just a box. So it hasn't got any curve or any sort of complicated stuff going on. So you could just have a segment of box shaped like this and move it. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be a programmatic solution. That would be a manual solution. You could also use the cut tool, and that's what we're going to try now. So if we come into this, we're going to want to make it into a blueprint. Make into blueprint. Make into blueprint. There's no option for that. Blueprints. Convert selection to blueprint class. That's correct. Now we're going to harvest it, so we're going to just create it as an actor, and it will have a mesh inside it. There we go. So this is our blueprint of our cube, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to cut it up. So to do that, we're going to come over here into this construction script, and we are going to try some mesh cutting. So I know that you can do mesh cutting along a plane. I just don't know whether you can do it along an arbitrary arc. All right, so I think that it has to be a dynamic mesh to allow that. I think we've got to cast this to a dynamic mesh. Yeah. Specifically, I think we've got to make a procedural mesh out of it. Procedural mesh. There we are. So if we take a look, there is a way to generate a procedural mesh. Here's the slice command. But first we'll do this. Copy procedural mesh from static mesh component. And we want to have a procedural mesh in here, so we will just hit add, and then we'll see whether we can add a procedural mesh. There it is. Just call it procedural mesh, I suppose. And that's going to be, well, we don't want them inside each other. That's a bad idea. So we're going to need another object. At the very least, we need to there, we'll just do that. That's fine. So the procedural mesh component is here. There we go. And then we have a procedural mesh. Once that's done, we would normally hide the static mesh component. So we would use a set active, set visible, set visibility. Shapow. That way we see the procedural mesh rather than the static mesh. And I've done this before, so I'm pretty confident about that part. But the question is, what else can we do with this procedural mesh that we've got? So if we take a look at what we got from the pull down here, there's a lot of stuff, and it's all garbage. We have to like type in procedural mesh. Oh, great. Look at all these incredibly worthless add-ins now that we've got something called procedural mesh. So we're going to rename this from procedural mesh to procedural esh. That way we can search for procedural mesh functions. There we are. So procedural mesh functions. Add collision, clear, generate, create, mesh, get num is mesh section visible. So I don't know. I don't know what this means. Create grid mesh split. Generate a vertex buffer, index buffer, and UVs for a grid mesh. What's a grid mesh? I searched for procedural mesh, so presumably this is a procedural mesh variant. The mic is slowly slipping down, and I've been chasing it. There. So the idea here is that when you carve these meshes apart, you get two distinct sections like this. But until we've carved it apart, obviously it's not going to be very much use. I don't see any advanced like slicing. All we've got is the plane, which means that we could slice it as long as it had a perfectly straight cut point, which I mean has some value, but it has a lot of obvious problems as well. And in addition, this has a lot of issues with its implementation, or at least it did in 4.9, and I assume it's the exact same in 5. Some of the problems with it include that it does not actually update the procedural mesh, and therefore does not generate proper collision data. The caps that it generates aren't properly instantiated according to expected rules, so they're very hard to handle. There's lots of problems with this slice. I think what we're supposed to do with the procedural mesh, I think what most people do with the procedural mesh is actually generate it, like using math. I don't feel like it. Well, I don't really know what else to think about. I mean, obviously I can just go back to thinking about topology. There are certain curves along a plane. You know, when you understand the plane as part of a ship, part of a hull, there are certain curves that look natural, that look good, and it makes sense to have your topology run along those curves because that way you can create the shapes that you want to create with fairly small changes. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and just have an example of that next. So let me go ahead and open up some 3D modeling softwares and stuff. Ba-chum. Blender, come to me. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba. That's not it. Yeah, something like that. Geometry. There we go. And we'll call this untitled.blend. Very clever name. We'll pull you back in now. Ciao. All right. So here we are in Blender, a cleverly named untitled.blend file. We're going to create a ship hull just to show you what I mean. Not a full one, just a piece, right? So normally what you would do is you'd have something like this, right? Well, let's do it with the y-axis. And then you'd have a little bit of shaping to the hull, something maybe like this. And this one is symmetrical, but they don't have to be. They can be quite asymmetrical, right? And if we were thinking about what shapes would be good on this hull, one of the obvious choices is this, right? So if you have this kind of shape, then what you can do is you can select certain faces according to what you would like to do, and then just move them. Now this will give you a specific bump, and you can do this in shader. There's no reason that you have to do it in modeling. You would just use a clipping mask of some sort, and you know, if the vertex is within the clipping plane, the clipping area, then you move it up or down according to whatever the setting is, and then you can just move it around. The problem is that when you do that, the model itself has to be built in such a way that the motions you're creating look good. So for example, if we were to try and create a clipping element that looked like this, and we tried to do that, we're going to get some garbage, and it's not going to look right. And that's the sort of thing that happens all the time when you're doing this, which is why your clipping mask, your mask has to match the flow of the verts. And that means that in some cases it's better not to use a mask at all. Instead, you use something like vertex coloring or something similar, or you use very strict UV protocols, like you make sure that your UV maps are unwrapped mathematically in a very specific way, and then you can say, oh yeah, everything below 0.38 on the UV gets boosted or whatever. Either way, we're talking about moving something across this surface that creates a bump in the surface. And that doesn't work very well when it's arbitrarily shaped. The topology of the surface has to match the topology that you're trying to create with your bump, which has some pretty serious limitations, as you might expect. It means that this sort of setup is going to mean this always looks this way. We could do something a little bit different. For example, we could just do this, and then we could just bevel it like this. And depending on how we set this up, it could happen in a lot of different ways, right? But this would give you a couple of options in terms of how you want it to look. It would give you 3 or 4 different sorts of visuals, right? Because there's several different planes that you can actually do this on. This one is the most obvious one. But you could also do it here. And you can see how that would work fine. And depending on the damage you're willing to take, you could do it here. It'll look a little bit strange. But here's the thing, you can actually get this to look fine if you are careful about how you're cutting these parts. So right now we're using quads. If we were to switch from using quads to tris, since that's actually what happens in the game engine, we could start to carve these up in a way that creates the flavor that we want out of this particular part of the curve, like this. And you can see that that already looks much more natural. And we would continue to cut along those planes. It wouldn't be visible on the other ones because they're not being raised asymmetrically like that. But you can see how much better that is than having an arbitrary set of quads trying to figure out what's going on. And we could also do it this way, right? Now this is the way that Blender did it automatically, so it doesn't look very different. Just by playing around, you can quickly start to see the sorts of shapes that work or don't work. But one of the things about this that's kind of nice is that you can pretty much just do as much topological damage as you want to these meshes, as long as they're never going to be animated, right? Because that means that we can create something like this ripple, and then we could also, cut across and create a pattern running this way. We could even do something like do a fracture command. What is it? F3? Fracture? Cell fracture. Ka-chow. For some reason, the default cell fracture is, as I recall, really primitive. There it is. Boom. There we go. So we could even do something like this. And what this would do is it would mean that these pieces, we could just recombine them all. Ka-chow. Active element is not a mesh. Okay. There. I selected too many meshes. There we are. Ka-chow. We could even do something like this, right? So this is the shattered mesh that we've got. And as we raise up pieces here, we'll get very different sorts of visuals. Now the shattering in this case is visible on the default mesh. That is something we could alter. It doesn't have to be. But that means that, if we wanted to, if we had a UV system for doing it, we could, raise specific elements here. And in order to make this really work, what we would do is we would clear all of these there. So now they're no longer different islands. The other approach would be to leave them as different islands. It's really up to us. Oh, look at that. It's really badly damaged. But you can see how this sort of approach is basically the same sort of deal. It's all about, when you're modifying the mesh like this, it's all about what it looks like when you do the modification. And these modifications are basically free in Engine, right? If I am fracturing shit like this in Engine, I can just run math on it. I can say move it up, move it down, run it around. Here comes the UV scrolling. It's going to ripple and all that jazz. But if the underlying topology doesn't support a good visual for that, it's not going to look good. Most people who do this, I think they use meshes that are procedural. I think they use some kind of like maybe a compute shader, and I'm a little bit lost on compute shaders. Maybe I should look into that, but certainly not on screen. There's no reason for me to try and learn that on screen. I'll learn that off screen. Either way, you can see why I wanted to get the tessellation going, because basically I wanted to know whether or not there was any decent way for us to arbitrarily cut shapes like these, but according to basically a stamp. Like I wanted to be able to create a union between two objects, cut them apart, separate them. It doesn't appear to be a function in Unreal that already exists. I know you can do it mathematically. The real problem with doing it mathematically is that you would have to do it a lot. Whereas if it's part of a shader, it just kind of happens in the background. Because it's one of those things. It doesn't quite work very well when you have to do it 10,000 times per frame. It's creating new meshes constantly. It's a big memory hog. But yeah, I'll have to think about it. I'll have to think about what approaches there are. I'll try to find some compute shader stuff. I'll look into some nanite stuff, see what we can get going. Because I don't want to struggle with topology if I can help it. I want these things to just happen naturally. It's fun to think about topology. It would be better if I didn't have to. I think I spent enough time wasting your time. I'll see you around, hopefully on Wednesday, if I get my shit together. See ya.